Hey, this is Joe. Welcome back for another video. In this video, we're going to talk about cleaning and packing wheel bearings, the old school way and the new school way. So I'll leave the final judgment up to you on which is the better way. What we've done here is I have a wheel bearing that I have freshly cleaned. I use kerosene and a brush and a little stainless steel container. After brushing and getting all the old wheel bearing grease out of the bearing, I then take some brake clean solution and I spray that to remove any trace of the kerosene. Again, some of you may think this is going beyond what a normal person would do, but I don't like to leave any solvent residue on the bearing that I'm about ready to pack with fresh grease. So again, just a precaution that I take. Some of you may not agree with that, and that's perfectly okay. So we have a fresh bearing here. We're going to now show you the old school way of packing a wheel bearing. This takes a lot of time. For many years, it was the preferred way of packing wheel bearings with grease. So I'm going to show you how we're going to do this. And then I'm going to show you the new way that a lot of people use to pack bearings. You can then decide which is the best way to pack wheel bearings. We can then use a regular, in this case, this is a high temp wheel bearing grease. And the way we were taught many, many years ago was to get some wheel bearing grease and put some in the palm of your hand. And then what you do is you take the bearing, and then you, with the edge of the bearing, you very gently push the grease in between the rollers of the bearing, and you keep on pushing that grease up into the bearing surfaces until the bearing fills. And as you look very closely, you can see the grease starting to push its way up between the rollers in the bearing. Notice the grease starting to come out at the top here. And as we keep working our way around the bearing, you'll see the little traces of grease starting to work its way up through the rollers. And again, this is the way I was taught many, many years ago in auto shop class. And I've seen many other people follow this same pattern of the proper way to pack a wheel bearing with new grease. The purpose being is that by forcing the grease up in between the rollers, you're completely encapsulating all of the rollers in between the outer bearing and the inner race here. That's the solid piece here. And as you see, as we start using up all of the grease, it's going up in between the rollers. So when you get ready, you just take yourself some more grease, put it in the palm of your hand, and you keep on forcing that grease in between the rollers that are between the inner race and the outer ring of the bearing. It's pretty easy. It just takes quite a bit of effort to do this. And again, what we're looking for is the grease to start creeping out on the top surface of the bearing here. And again, ultimately, when I'm done doing all of the surfaces, I'll then take a layer of grease and go around the entire outside portion of the rollers and the outer bearing race. And again, you can see how that is packing in the bearings. This way, again, we're making sure that each roller is getting grease in between it, and the bearing is completely being encapsulated in grease. Is this an effective way of packing wheel bearings? Well, it has been for many years, but as you can see, it takes quite a bit of time to do that. And as you can see, it's pretty obvious the amount of grease we're packing into the bearing, because our hand keeps on emptying out and the grease is going in between the rollers on the bearing. So I'm just going to keep on going all the way around the bearing, and we're going to keep on packing that grease until we get a nice amount of grease coming up between all the rollers. And I'm not really speeding up the video footage here because I want you to see just how labor intensive this is. As we start to finish, you'll see the grease again starting to push out. Put some more grease in the hand here. We can do this both ways. We can go from the top of the bearing, pushing the grease and watching the grease come out of the bottom of the bearing. And after we go all the way around, notice, then we can flip the bearing over and we can go from the larger portion of the bearing up to the smaller portion of the bearing. We're making sure that we're getting a sufficient amount of grease in between the rollers, and as you see here, the grease is nicely coming up between. Now when we're completely done, then what we want to do is we want to take some grease and we want to completely encapsulate the inner race and the outer portion of the bearing with grease, and that is the old school method of properly packing a bearing with new fresh bearing grease. Now in the next bearing I'm going to show you the new school way, which of course goes much quicker, much easier to do, and we'll take a look and compare both the old against the new. On the next bearing we perform the same treatment. We wash the bearing in kerosene and then we brake cleaned it. Now in the new school method we have a bearing press. There's a grease fitting on here. There's a hole down at the bottom of the cone here. This cone can take different sized bearings, and we can then screw this on, try to get a fairly even bearing placement here on this cup and try to get it fairly snug. And then what we're going to do is we have our grease gun. We're going to put that on, and now we're going to pump and see. Okay, let's take another peek. Okay, nothing yet. Let's go pump some more. There we go. If you look inside, you'll see that grease is starting to come out of the rollers around the bearing. Let's pump a little bit more. Look at that. If you look inside, we got a fair amount of grease coming out. Let's disconnect this now. And let's open the top here. Pull the bearing off, and notice the grease has worked its way around the bearing. I'm going to take some grease and rub it around the outside of the rollers here. We did pack the bearing. It's a little bit temperamental to use this. I would say it used maybe a little bit more grease. What I'm going to do is have to scrape this grease off and put it in my grease container, and then I can reuse that. As you see, we do have a packed wheel bearing, and it looks pretty decent. Would I switch to the new method? Possibly. Again, doing it the old-fashioned way for me is pretty reliable. This took maybe a little bit less, and wouldn't you know it, the damn guy with the weed eater is already starting up. So hope you enjoyed this video, and hopefully you can then make your own decision on whether you want to pack your bearings old school or new school. So thanks a lot. We'll see you next time.